simple truth. Sweetest tongue has sharpest tooth.
Hey folks, Kilt-Man here, Kilt-Man! At your services. How are you all? I hope you're doing very, very well. Now, some of you may have known that this video has been a long time coming. But as usual, stuff happens. Stuff in the guise of Big Kilt Mama, who is not very well. And her little kilted wolf cub, Kilt-Man, has been doing his utmost to, make sure things are a lot easier for her. But anyway, here we are now, long delayed, The Company of Wolves. A fable, a fantasy, a fairy phantasmagoria. It is a wonderful, wonderful movie. Made in 1984 by great director, Neil Jordan. Co-written by Neil Jordan and Angela Carter. Based on her own short stories and poems and novels, where she took the Grimm's fairy tales of yore and gave them a hugely strong, erotic, horrifying, feminist stance, updating the stories and yet making the stories equally as timeless as the original fairy stories always were and always will be. I'll just turn down George Fenton's fantastic score just for a second. And you heard that marvellous message, mantra, delivered at the end of the movie, which starts at the beginning of the soundtrack album. But you'll probably hear that a couple more times because we're going to talk a lot about this movie and this score will roll around a couple of times. Anyway, folks, I hope you're all doing very, very well. And never stray from the path, never eat a windfall apple, and never trust a man whose eyebrows meet in the middle. Now, Neil Jordan had just done Angel and won huge accolades for it. And then he'd met with Angela Carter, who was already massively well known, a highly prestigious award winner in literary circles herself. And she had done the Bloody Chamber collection of stories, including The Werewolf, The Wolf Girl, and The Company of Wolves, which this film takes its title from. And she had just done a radio adaptation of The Company of Wolves, and she approached him in Dublin and said, we can make a film out of this. And he said, well, yeah, I like the idea of it. I like this sort of tweaking and eroticizing the original Grimm's fairy stories, particularly Little Red Riding Hood. But I need a bit more meat on the bones and a whole way of structuring this as a movie. So the two of them decamped and spent a couple of weeks writing together. And they came up with a framing device for the sort of anthology style of stories which Angela Carter had written. And they came up with the idea that young Rosaline, I should say, played by Sarah Patterson, is in the big country house with her mum and dad and her snotty, snooty older sister. And she's on the cusp of adolescence. And she's dreaming and she's having her own sexual awakening. But in the context of dreams, she goes back into an old sort of quasi-medieval, not dark age, but a purely fantastical sort of oldie English milieu. A studio-bound set where she will have stories told to her by her mother, by her grandmother, granny out in the woods, and then she'll proceed to tell her own stories, and she'll have a fateful encounter with the huntsman, who is the big bad wolf, and her change of life, her becoming a woman will take place. And it's all the subject of symbolism, heavy metaphor, allegory, and just complete sensual subtext, but given a werewolf slant. So folks, me and the pack have convened to discuss what is one of our favourite werewolf movies. Neil Jordan will tell you this is not a horror film. And as much as I love Neil Jordan, and I think he's a fabulous director, so many great films, Mona Lisa, Michael Collins, Interview with the Vampire, my God. But of all his films, it's this that I come back to most of all. And I have to say, it is a horror film. horror films take the subtext, take the stylistic, impressionistic motifs from literature, from theatre, from whatever, and you can dress them up and you can put any kind of psychological slant upon them, but if you've got werewolves in them, it's a horror film. But with all the accompanying richness and decadence and massive levels of complexity, of moralising. So there's a lot going on in The Company of Wolves. And I gotta say, I do love The Company of Wolves, which is just as well with this lot snarling down the back of my neck. But anyway, so made in 1984, starring the very young Sarah Patterson as Rosalind, who is the main star of this. And I do believe that there was some kind of controversy because of the highly eroticised element of this movie. She was born in 1970, which is the year after I was born. So when this film came out, I was massively into this movie, by being a massive werewolf fan anyway. And I saw her being interviewed on the likes of TVAM. Remember that? TVAM and Breakfast Time TV. And she was sat there with a wolf. Now, Neil Jordan always says that wolf actually went for Sarah Patterson and they had to drag the wolf away. I don't remember that sequence, but because I taped, back in the days of videotape, I was so entranced by this forthcoming movie, and I had a massive crush on Sarah Patterson herself, that I taped this and I'd watched this interview over and over again, and she had this wolf and she was stroking this wolf. In the film there are many, many four-legged friends, but only one wolf. They couldn't get wolves. In the UK it was very hard to get wolves in. They found two, but as Neil Jordan recites the tale, that when they were bringing them down from up north in the land of wolves, one wolf ate the other one. I'm not sure how true that really is, but they ended up with one wolf and then a huge assortment of German Shepherds, Belgian Shepherd dogs, which are slightly bushier, and Malamuts and Huskies and normal dogs, And these things, the bushier ones look more wolfy. Some of them look like pure dogs, but in the context of the movie and the fairy tale-like setting, they blend perfectly well. So, young Rosalind, she's borrowed her sister's lipstick, and she thinks she's put some of her dresses on, and she's having a sort of almost, rapturous dream, which lasts the entire movie. She's locked herself in her room, and her big sister's outside the door going, pest, 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 banging the door. So in the dream world, suddenly her sister, in the film's grand sort of opening sequence, she's chased by wolves through a hugely fairy tale, pure set-bound forest with giant mushrooms, with lizards and geckos and spiders and snakes and all sorts. And also a doll's house festooned with rats, a big grandfather clock with spiders and all sorts in there, and all the toys that are actually, the dolls that are actually in Rosalind's room, which are now huge and big and like threatening. And she witnesses her sister being pursued by a pack of wolves with glowing eyes, and then she's dragged down by these wolves. And then we enter into this sort of medieval, it's hardly medieval because they have got rifles, but then again it doesn't really matter. This is a young girl's fantasy dreamland where literally anything can happen, So as we will encounter, there is also a white 1920s Rolls Royce in there as well, in the middle of the woods, but we'll get on to that. So she then dreams that she's back in this time period, in this little rural village hamlet, which is a beautiful set. Everyone talks about, it's inspired by Hammer. It's actually more inspired by the paintings of Samuel Palmer and Gustave Doré and German Expressionism. And particularly film-wise, Neil Jordan always says, film-wise, it was more like the Edgar Allan Poe movies that Roger Corman made in the 60s, for that flamboyant, hyper-real, but totally set-bound design, matte shots, paintings, forced perspective. That kind of milieu is what he created, again, on a very meagre budget. At the same time, George Lucas was making, or just made Return of the Jedi, and Ridley Scott was doing Legend on an equally, in fact, massively huge version of the similar sort of set-bound forest set that Neil Jordan was using on this. Jordan always says we only had about 12 trees. Well, I'll be honest with you, however they did it, moving trees around, redressing stuff, changing the path, changing the shots, adding miniatures, it looks fantastic. It never feels limited by budget. It feels designed to be a very limited sort of the closed world of this young girl and her strange, warped, sexualized fantasies. It all feels perfectly enwrapped and enraptured within this bubble, this cocoon. So she's now gone back to this sort of time period, and her father is the great David Warner. Yes, David Warner's in here as well, and it's a lovely little rustic village. But we enter this world with her sister, which we've already seen being killed by the wolves. She's being put to rest in the ground, and it's the burial of her sister. Now, being as this whole thing is about sex, about a young girl's awe, fear, wonder, and naivety and curiosity about sex, but given a horrific slant, it always struck me that the body of her sister is clearly not been ravaged by wolves. We see bruising on her. So I've always took that in a more horrific sort of way, that she's been the victim of sexual murder, a rape and murder by a real monster out in the woods. And the rest of the film and everybody around it is then trying to warn Rosaline, look, don't stray from the path. Don't trust a man whose eyebrows meet in the middle. It's all told of stories within stories within stories, moralistic fables, which of course what fairy stories always were. The Grimm's stories were always cautionary tales. You never can trust a man out in the woods. Don't eat a windfall apple. It's going to be rotten on one side. There'll be worms in it and all of that sort of stuff. There's always a basis in truth. And, these are moralistic stories which are told to, scare. In the original stories, they were very scary. They were definitely horror stories. It's only over time that we softened them down and made them more sort of cartoony and, hey, it's not that bad. It's just a little fable. No, it's supposed to scare kids from the realities of life out there and the predatory nature of the adult world. So, and of course, Jordan's film and his script with Angela Carter really, really bigs all this up. Some people say it's horribly, I was going to say on the nose, but more like on the snout. The dialogue, the set pieces are all very, very overt and obvious, but that's the point, I would say. A young person, and this is the other thing, it doesn't necessarily have to be viewed from a young girl's point of view. Blokes, when they hit adolescence, they have all the same amounts of wonder, awe, fear, revulsion and curiosity about sex that girls do. It's just, they try to mask it differently, and everyone wears masks, don't we? Yeah. So anyway, she begins to get told these cautionary tales by Granny, played by Angela Lansbury. Murder, she wrote. Yes, she's in here. And she's wonderful as well. A right proper little scene stealer she is. With her little spectacles on, and her hair all tied up. And her knitting and all of this sort of stuff. And, come along quickly now, back to the cottage. Of course, stupidly, Granny does live way out from the village. You've got to go down this circuitous path. Never leave the path, never stray from the path, and beware the moon. Oh, that's different. Although we have got Brian Glover, the Tetley T-Man from American Werewolf, and chucks out the Mexican. He's in here as well. Yes, so you've got another throwback, a werewolf callback there. David Warner, a veteran of so many horror movies and genre movies, and you've got Brian Glover in there as well. It's just perfect. You've also got Terence Stamp. General Zod is in here. Magnificent. And playing the devil. Anyway, we're racing ahead of ourselves. So, she's getting told all these tales. There's also a little village scrote who's Brian Glover's son in this. And he's got the hots for Rosaline. So he's forever trying to, take her out into the woods. But he's not a villain. Or maybe he never gets the chance to be a villain. He tries to steal a kiss. He will try to coerce her to lead her away. But I don't think he's a bad lad. He's just, even in the context of these fairy stories, he's not a bad lad. He's the red herring, if anything, because he'll look after, he'll try to protect her, but she doesn't want him because he's only a little scroat. She wants a big scroat. She wants a man. And this is the whole crux of it. It's how Rosaline is beginning to deal with her own body changing, her own desires, her own naivety and vulnerability, how the world around her is treating her, how she can use her own sexuality to empower herself and take what she wants. Well, we'll come on to all of this. So the stories that get told within this dream world, some are obvious. We have the great Stephen Ray, Irish actor, from Angel, from Interview with the Vampire, from many, many movies. Wonderful actor. And he plays the travelling man. And this was a young lady who fell in love with a travelling man. Part of, the travelling people. Gypsies. Yes, gypsies. You kind of know this guy's not going to settle down. So after big celebrations, they're going to consummate their marriage. He undresses Stephen Ray, and she ogles him. It's probably with the first man she's probably seen naked, and he's like, "Do I frighten you?" And she's like, and then, but we've howling outside, wolves. There's a moon shining out there as well. He seems distant. He seems, there's something calling to him. I'm like, "Where are you going?" "I just go outside. I won't be long." So he goes out. Doesn't get seen again for many, many years. The story seems to be that while he was out making water, having a midnight piss, the wolves had took him. So in the meantime, this girl has since married somebody else, and she has 3 little kids. Years have gone by. Anyway, one wintry night, the snow is all about. This guy comes back, Stephen Ray comes back, his hair's now down to his waist. He's very feral, he comes back. The man of the house isn't there. And he comes in, and she recognises him. And he recognises her, and he sees the kids, and he's like, "I'm starving." So a little pot of broth, a bowl of broth is put in front of him. He's like that, putting his hand. "So where did these 3 spring from?" he says. "A big bad wolf, where do these 3 spring from?" And he's like, "From my belly." "Oh, witch!" and all this, and he goes for her, and he begins to transform. He begins to tear his face. She's gone for him. She's trying to save the kids. And in probably the goriest sequence in the movie, he does rip his face to shreds. Chris Tucker did the effects for the movie. Some are great, some are not so great. All have dated, but we'll come on to that. Tears his face apart. And then an animatronic wolf pops out and turns around just in time for her husband to come back, who manages to behead the wolf, sending the wolf's head, spiraling through the air to land in a pail of milk. The wolf's head sinks. Stephen Ray's head comes up, bathed in frothy, milky blood. And then the husband smacks the missus, "What have you been doing?" All this kind of stuff. And the husband, incidentally, is from Downton Abbey. It's Carson, the head butler from Downton Abbey, whose name was, what's his name? James Carter, I think his name is. But see him in his younger days in a werewolf movie. Yes, it's great. Obviously, he got out of the hovel and got into the big house, the manor house. Another story, which is perhaps one of the strangest ones in there, has a boy in the woods meeting the devil. And the devil in the form of Terence Stamp, who is chauffeur driven by Rosaline herself in a chauffeur's uniform with a big peak cap on, and she's got long blonde hair. She's a dark haired girl, but she's got blonde hair in this sequence. And in the back is Terence Stamp as the devil. This is a 1920s Rolls Royce, which has just rolled up. Initially we see just the headlights, like 2 feral eyes of a wolf in the distance. And this boy, this teenage lad, he's obviously summoned the devil. And the devil, Terence Stamp, sitting there holding a real genuine pygmy skull in his hand. Sees him, okay. He's got a little selection of potions and lotions and ointments. Selects one. Use it wisely. Waste not, want not, and gives it to the lad. And then, on your way, off they drive into the distance, into this fantastically evocative, set-bound forest. And the kid opens this lotion up, smears it on his chest, as you do, when a strange man gives you a lotion and potion. Smears it on his chest, hairs sprout. So we think, he's going to be a werewolf, yes. But in a scene very reminiscent of the original Evil Dead, you suddenly have all the trees and the vines and the roots encircle his legs, and he's trapped. And in a mirror image, we see his face contorted. He screams, ah! Granny's told this story to Rosalind. Rosalind's like, that's not a very nice story. Well, this is what happens. Don't go out in the woods. Don't trust anyone. The story doesn't really tell you anything. That's not a fable. That, if anything, the whole reason of the ointment in folklore and werewolf traditions, which the film plays a lot on as well, people wanted to be werewolves because, in days of poverty, and persecution, you want the strength of a werewolf. I want to be able to live and pray and hunt, a rut in the woods like they do in The Howling. But very often people would go and seek out these weird old women in their gingerbread houses in the woods, and they would give them lotions and potions and say, just smear this on yourself under the light of the full moon and you'll become a wolf. Obviously, never worked for me. Tried it loads of times, just get a nasty rash. Oh, Little Red Riding mug. And but that's the end of that story, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. It's just an embroidery of the weirdness and the surreality of the fantasy world that she's fallen into, that she's sunk herself into. Another story is the wedding party, which is a great one. This is one of the more famous stories in there. And you've got this sort of decadent 17th century sort of, mock Edwardian sort of social gathering of the wedding do. And they're all in this marquee in the grounds of the great big house we've seen at the start of the movie where Rosalind and her family live. And she's having her dreams secluded in her room, locked away. But it's the same house. Anyway, everything's all lovely, hunky-dory. It's all refinements, but these refined people are drinking a bit too much and they're a bit salacious. You cut the cake. This sort of squire-type guy, well-to-do, with his young bride, all hoi polloi, all, very refined and all that etiquette. It's waited on hand and foot by squadrons of servants. And you've got this old biddy, all dressed in her finery. They're all got the powder on their faces and beauty spots. And she's devouring meat. And she's one of these people as well. So already the beast in, the upper classes is revealed. Well, very graphically as it transpires. So anyway, it's all going very, very nicely. And a lovely, wild-looking woman who's heavily pregnant arrives in this big marquee. And everyone's stunned. And she's like, yeah, you forgot about me, didn't you? Oh, you loved me once. Loved me enough to put this in me. But now I don't matter to you, do I? And they're all like, uh-oh, what's she going to do? Well, she's a witch as well. And then mirrors are a recurring thing in this, of course. Mirror images, mirrors distort, mirrors twist. Mirrors also show maybe our real selves when we least expect it. She looks in the mirror, and the mirror shatters. And it's got like spider webbed, but in the distorted glass, we see all the party goers, all these well-heeled people suddenly transforming. A bodice is ripped open to reveal fairy breasts, big paws, smash wine glasses. All these beautiful shoes and boots are broken asunder as big fairy clawed paws erupt forth. And then next we see a huge pack of these, one wolf, Belgian shepherds, German shepherds, Malamuts. They're all there and they're all dressed in these Edwardian finery. And they start having a ball at this big, long, banquet table. They start knocking things over. Candlesticks are going down. The big Christmas cake, wedding cake takes a topple, and they all plummet out of this tent, this marquee, almost completely stampeding across a couple of peacocks who happen to be, strutting in the way there. And they're still dressed in all this gear. A great moment in that, and it's deliberate, of course, is that all the servants, you can see them, because when they dressed all these dogs and these other canines, trying to, emulate, the werewolf transformation, and the dogs are all, but they're eating the bowls of soup and they're knocking over food and all that, and you can see all the servants, all the extras, are just going, they're laughing. And luckily, Jordan saw the good side of that and kept it all in there. So at the end of it, like the end of the sequence, the wolves have all run off. The witch bows down to all these men and they bow down to her. And then they all drink the wine and the champagne and all this sort of stuff because they've inherited it all by the sound of it. So Rosalind's told this story to her mother, and her mother says, like, well, what did she gain from that though? She said, well, it was power. Every full moon, the wolves would come to serenade and howl at her feet where she had her baby. And we cut to a great, beautiful, surreal shot against this brooding nighttime sky. And this witch is in the boughs of a big oak tree, and she has her baby in a basket which is swinging there. And we hear all the howls who've come to serenade her, because that's the power. So you can see what's happening here. Rosaline is developing her understanding of her own power, of a woman's power. That's what it's about. Assimilating, the fears that your parents have for your safety, and your vulnerability, your naivety, and people who are going to abuse you, but how to want that they desire you. And she gradually realizes the only way I can live in this other world is to, well, as we'll see, become one of them and use my own sexuality as a defense mechanism. And as we all know, a good defense is a good offense as well. So anyway, we'll move on. Other stories abound. Intermingled with this, we have little trips out to the woods with this young scroat, this tousle-haired little lad. And she goes missing from him at one time, and she climbs this huge tree. And as she climbs higher and higher, and he's shouting, Rosaline, Rosaline, knowing he's going to be in trouble because he's took her out into the woods and he's going to come back without her. Oh God. She climbs this tree and she reaches a point where there's a stork in a big nest, a stork. And as she gets there, it takes off, and she sees all these beautiful little sort of blue eggs in this nest. She finds a little hand mirror and some lipstick. I mean, again, it's very incongruous, isn't it? But it's all part of this girl's dreams. And she opens a lipstick and puts it on her lips, admires herself in the mirror, and the eggs, one by one, begin to crack open. And what we see inside them is, it's totally ambiguous and totally surreal. Little carved sort of babies, carved out of stone or wood or something. But little babies, little cherubs like that. She takes one. And of course, this little lad's gone back to the village. And in the meantime, David Warner, who's Rosaline's dad's, gone, where is she? Starts beating him up. Detective T-Man Brian Glover comes out of the slaughtered lamb and says, how do you do, my son? The two of them a big scrap. The mother realises, hang on a minute, calm down. Gets a big pail of water, chucks it over him, calms the fight down. And as the two combatants move aside, there's Rosaline standing there. Come here, my little angel. And she said, look, Mummy, look what I've got. And she's got one of these little babies. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, you can make up your own mind. You can spend forever and a day trying to analyse and dissect a scene like that. For me, it's showing the forbidden fruit of the forest and the repercussions of going off the path. You could end up pregnant. There you go. So yeah, it's just very simplistic, but the film is winning in its simplistic handling of complex issues. It lets them simmer and bubble, and they really, really work outstandingly well. So the whole thing is going to culminate, as you well know, that it's got to be Little Red Riding Hood and her encounter with the huntsman, who's going to go to Granny's house and take over Granny's role. But he's got those big eyes and big arms and great big teeth, you know. So, But she meets him in the woods. She's going out to see Granny, and she's already had a run-in with her mother about this. Like, you know, look, just because she doesn't like you as much as she likes me, that old woman, you know, and her ways, she's fogging your brain up with stuff going on and all this. And we've had a real life wolf, which has been preying on the livestock of the village. And obviously, perhaps this is the wolf that's meant to have killed her sister. Again, I think, even metaphorically, that it was actually, she's a victim of a rape and murder rather than just a wolf. I think it's more overt than that. That's just my leaning though. And but when she's gone missing before, Rosaline, this little lad has seen slaughtered cattle. Wolves out there. So all the villagers set a trap. There's a goose there, and they're all lying in wait with their rifles. And a wolf, and this is the real wolf that's on the set, comes padding down. They've all got glowing eyes. Very, very simple effect, but very, very effective though. Some of the eyes glow red, some go green, some glow yellow. And this wolf pads down, sees the goose, hurls itself as air, leaps, falls into the trap, and they all stand around. I don't know how much lead they pour into it, but this thing must be blown to bits. And David Warner returns home. He's aghast, he's ashen. And this is a pure werewolf fable. It's been written, handed down, pardon the pun, you'll see what I mean in a minute, handed down for centuries now. In almost every culture, they've got this type of story where a wolf has been killed, a savage big wolf, and they cut the paw off the wolf, but when they come home and they unwrap it, it's a hand. It's a human hand. Usually it's the hand of someone that the person knows, like it's the wife or it's the husband, you know. It's someone from their own family, and there's the horror. Oh, God. So they find this hand. But Daddy, whose hand is it? What does it matter whose hand it is, whether I knew him or not? When I took it, it was the paw of a wolf, the biggest wolf I ever saw. And then it turned into this hand, you know. And the mother's like, get it out of here. So they pick it up and they throw it in the fire, but the hand won't burn. Curiously, during this sequence, you've got Rosaline, who's not afraid of the hand, while David Warner's repulsed by it. And the mother is just in shock. Get out of here. Rosaline wants to go and touch it. She's investigating physicality, you know, morality. She's pushing boundaries, the taboos that surround her, that have cocooned her all their life so far. She's gradually chipping away at that suit of armour that she's been encased in, and she's breaking free. It's staggeringly intelligent stuff. As you know, it may be a bit on the snout in some ways, but that's because of the childlike aspect. When she meets the huntsman, her own lack of fear is because she's curious about him. This is a much older man, played by a dancer and choreographer called, what's his name? Misha Beges. And he's not an actor, but he's been on stage and theatrical productions and dance numbers and routines for many years before he came to do this. And Neil Jordan said, you know, I auditioned hundreds of people for this. I wanted a feral, animalistic quality. I wanted someone who could move, someone who could perhaps not enunciate their words in a Royal Shakespearean company style, but to have mannerisms and to be strangely weird. And we first encounter him. She's going to meet Granny. The little scrope from the village has tried to follow her. He's got, I can protect you. I've got this little dagger like that. And in a pure Crocodile Dundee moment, she's like, it's not a knife. This is a knife. And she's got this bloody big dagger like, I can protect myself. Because she's pushing back her own boundaries. She's going beyond, you know, all the things that she's been told to watch out for. She's ignoring it all now. Off she goes. He gets thwarted in following her because in a lovely little throwaway moment, they end up at a mine. There's a mine there just outside the village, a big cave entrance, and no one ever talks about this. They've got all these sort of mine carts, and all these workers are coming out. But the mine carts are full of like green and silver emeralds and diamonds and jewels, and it's very, very like Snow White. But they never talk about it. What is this stuff? What's the wealth that must be there that they're mining? But it's all because of her dreams. She's assimilated so much stuff from folklore, from literature, from stories, from films, from things people have told her, from Disney movies, that it's all coalescing inside this feverish dream world. And it's just a beautiful throwaway moment. So she gets away from this little Scroat, who's forever nameless. He's just known as Scroat as far as I'm concerned. And then she goes into the woods, and there's snakes, and there's loads of weird stuff in there. And she meets the huntsman, a tricorn hat on. He has a rifle and a fresh kill slung over his shoulder. But he's dressed in velvets and fine. There's gold speckling this blue embroidered jacket. Massive boots that come over his knees and all this sort of stuff. And he's great, very pantomime, very theatrical. You look at the way he moves, the way they squat down in the snow and talk together. Every gesture is so immaculately timed and lasts longer than anyone else would do it. And that's what Neil Jordan wanted. He wanted someone that could hang in the air with a poise, and he jerks his head from side to side, almost like he's cocking his ears to listen. His hair's tied back. He has his rifle. He shows her a compass. She goes, "How do you know your way in the woods?" Yeah, well, I never lose my way in the woods because I have this. And he opens a little compass. He said, "See this little needle here? It always points north. So I always know exactly, precisely where I am." And she's like, "I'm seeing it, but I'm not believing it. And yet it must be true." And it's all this sort of lyrical sort of toing and froing, and the dialogue is beautiful. You know, they say seeing is believing, but I'd never swear to it. And he's wooing her, he's seducing her. Now she's a young girl, so making this, she would be 13. I mentioned the controversy because I think they tried to say that she was actually older than she really was for some of these scenes. When I was only a kid at the time, and I fell massively in love with Sarah Patterson. I'm 52 now, so she'll be 51, and but you see they tussle, and he ends up on top of it. They're lying in the snow. He's had a little cookie which she's taking for Granny, and he puts it in his mouth, and he wants her to bite the other, so they're coming together. They roll across. She's not afraid, and that's the point that they're making. This is a very horrible sequence because I've got a teenage daughter, only 14, and any bloke that does that, he's going to lose his head very, very swiftly, you know. And this is what the film plays with. At some point, your children are going to change, and they're going to form I'm talking around things here. They're going to become adults, and they're going to do things. I did it. You've done it. We've all done it. We're all going to do it. Every new generation is going to go through it. So as much as the film is about a young girl's sexual awakening, her understanding of her own desires, and her understanding of other people's desires for her, and how she can reconcile it and use it, it's also about how parents are going to have to deal with this as well. As a kid watching The Company of Wolves, I saw it from the kid's point of view. I also saw it from a horror fanatic's point of view. And for me, the film delivered, despite what Neil Jordan says. It's still a great horror movie as well. But I understood all the metaphors. You know, I was a very bright kid, you know. That's to say, a lot of it's very overt. A lot of it, the way it's written, the way it's acted, the way it's directed, speaks to the younger sensibility, to the younger mind as well. So that's how these things are really come across so deeply. But watching it now as an adult, I can clearly see a horrible new level of complexity and awkwardness and fear. Told you to come around again.
Never stop upon your
We'll listen to it.
Never trust a stranger friend. No one knows how it
So beautiful and haunting.
Now, as then, 'tis simple truth, sweetest tongue, has sharpest tooth.
And you know, another thing is, as well as like, you know, a young girl, her awakening, her realization of the dangers that are out there, that the dangers are real. And it's the same for the bloke, the dangers are real for a bloke as well, for a boy, you know, it doesn't really matter. That doesn't change, because how many people go through abusive relationships and then make the same mistake again and again and again, or get attacked coming home from a nightclub or whatever, trusting someone, getting their drink spiked. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can still make the same mistakes over and over again, or even just one mistake. Whether you're 14 or 50, doesn't really matter. You can still make that mistake, and that mistake may cost you your life by trusting a stranger friend. You know, that's what it's all about. There's so much more going on, and she, with the huntsman, comes to that her own sort of conclusion. He's got the compass. And he said, like, where are you going? I'm going to the granny's house. Well, you know, why didn't you use the compass and come with me? It's quicker across country. No, you'll get lost across country. I'll stick to the path. Okay, we'll make a bet then. You take your path and I'll go my way, and let's see who gets to granny's first. And if I win, you owe me. Okay. Well, you know where this is going, don't you? Of course you do. Huntsman, it's now night time. The moon is up. His hair's now loose because he's given his tricorn hat to her. She's got her red shawl on, a little Red Riding Hood, and the huntsman's got to the cottage first. And Granny, Angela Lansbury, is in the rocking chair. Bum, bum, bum. Who is it? It's only me, your granddaughter. Lift up the latch and walk in, she says. And he comes in, and he already had eyebrows that met in the middle. There's a big giveaway there. But now they've gone pure Scorsese. They're massive. David Hemmings and Scorsese eyebrows are in full eruption, full plumage. And he comes in and she's like, get you back to hell from whence you came. And like, she's had this, is it a stoat or a weasel, which sort of lives on the door. When Rosalind's been staying there before, listening to stories, this little thing's been looking up and hissing at it. It's just an animatronic. And it obviously it's stuck on this door. And as he comes in, and she's like aghast because it's the beast, the wolf has entered her cottage. After all her warnings, it's come for her, like, and this thing goes hiss like that. And Misha Baguette just goes bang, just thumps his fist into it, squashes it dead. And then he comes for Granny. And Granny smacks him, and she picks up a fire poker, and she hits him in the hand. He catches it, and then this goes bang, and smacks her head off her shoulders, a bit mimicking what happened to Stephen Ray's Travelling Man losing his head to Carson from Downton Abbey, only in a dreamy, surreal shot. Jordan thought, you know, why don't we have a head become like a porcelain doll, like a china doll, so when it comes off her shoulders, it's going to fly across the room, hit the wall and shatter. And that's what they do. So it's not like a gory, arterial blood spraying everywhere. It's not. It becomes a very artful, beautiful and mysterious shot. Bang! And the head goes and then hits. It's beatific music. Hits the wall and shatters and cascades to the floor. And then, of course, Rosaline turns up. There's blood in the snow outside, because that kill he had over his shoulder when he first got to Granny's gate, he's like licked some of the blood off this kill, so his blood's dripped onto the snow. So she's seen that, an ominous sign already. And of course, you know, knocks on the door, and he's in the rocking chair now, and in a great, beautiful, incredibly dreamlike shot, we've seen the full moon above her, and the full moon, we have a close-up, he's just like that, rocking in the chair with his long hair over his... You're pretty much emulating it right now, but I'm not as good looking as he is though. And he's rocking up in the chair like that. And then suddenly his eye, because he hears it or he smells it outside, he stops rocking and his eyes slowly move, and the eye becomes the full moon, or the full moon becomes his eye. Who knows what it means? It just looks phenomenal. And, who is it? Only your granddaughter. Lift up the latch and walk in, he says. It's delightfully hideous the way he does it. And then she walks in and she's like, oh, so you did get here first then? Yes, I did. And he's doing all this head twitchy stuff. It's great. It's really, really good stuff. Where's my gran? She's just outside, fetching wood for the fire. Really? That's not very gentlemanly of you, to let an old woman go out in the cold like that. She won't be long. So of course she looks outside the curtain, and she's not there. Well, the jig's up really, isn't it? The confrontation takes place. Wolves appear outside. Who's come to sing us carols then? Only my friends, darling. I love the company of wolves. And they're all out there, right? And she begins to interrogate him. She knows that this is the culmination of everything that she's been told and warned about. This is now going to happen to her. The inevitability of sexual liberation. It's happening. Why fight it? That's what comes across. She's not going to fight this. She also clearly, seemingly wants it. But there's fear, wonder, revulsion, awe, and desire, all rolled into both of them, both their characters. So she begins to interrogate him. Are you our kind or their kind? Not one nor the other. Both. Are you only a man when you dress like one? It's wonderful. It's wonderfully lyrical and yet very straightforward. The questions a child would ask. The simple thing about, my, what big eyes you've got, which she does say. My, what big arms you've got. Jesus, what big teeth you've got. It is like a child suddenly, when a child asks questions, they're very blunt and they ask the things that an adult won't ask. An adult mostly knows the answers already, but a child will ask these things fearlessly, but out of curiosity. And that's what Rosaline is doing. Again, I keep saying this. It's this combination of her own naivety and her own sense of wonder. And this becomes her defence, which I say can become offence as well. And that be her protection. So she realises that Granny's being killed. You see her hair is going into the fire. Obviously, he's burnt all the bits he couldn't eat. She goes, your kind can't stomach hair, can they? Even if the worst wolves are hairy on the inside. Another little mantra she's heard from Granny. And the jig's up. He's not going to try and hide it anymore. And it's like, you're soaked through. Take your shawl off. What to do with it then? Throw it on the fire. You won't need it again. This is going to happen. I'm going to have you. I've said many, many times when I've written reviews, when I've done these videos, werewolves are my thing. I love werewolves. I love vampires too. But vampires are always being depicted throughout literature and folklore. Well, not so much folklore. Folklore, they're quite savage, feral creatures themselves. But in movies, maybe not since the likes of True Blood, but they are depicted as being sexual creatures. And yet, up until True Blood, they never actually had any sex. For them, it's the culmination, it's all the build-up, it's all the foreplay, the sensual, the tease, the hypnotism and all that. Once the bite's done, the deed is done, it's over. There's no fun times. Werewolves, it's completely different. Werewolves are savage creatures. The very act of biting and eating and using claws is penetration. So metaphorically, it's sex, it's rape. It's savage rape, but they're earthy creatures. They hump, make the beast with two backs out in the woods. This is what they do. You don't see vampires doing that. Okay, you do now, but you never did before the likes of True Blood came out, where they're highly sexualized and actually doing the deed. But werewolves always were, even if it's just symbolic. You go back for always going for the woman out in the woods, out in the mist, on the moors. Look at Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf. He's going for the thing he loves. He goes. It's highly sexualized. And the whole film Company of Wolves revolves around using werewolves as this. You couldn't have done this with vampires. It would not have worked. So they're going to do the deed. It's going to happen regardless. But at the point where, Jesus, what big teeth you've got, she pushes him away. And it's like, I did indeed win my bet. So now you owe me a kiss. And all this. And she's got his rifle. Bang! She hits him in the shoulder. Whoosh! Takes him down. He's already took his big gothic billowing white shirt off to reveal a phenomenal physique. He's a dancer, as I say. And Neil Jordan said, I want someone who can actually show their muscles moving. So in a sort of real life version of what David Norton goes through for John Landis in The American Werewolf in London, where Rick Baker's effects show bone structure and muscle definition creaking up across his spine and broadening his back, Misha Begess just rise on the floor like that, and with the lighting and the shadows, his back contorts. No special effects. It's just his own physicality doing it. And it's extraordinary. It looks brilliant. Then you get the effect. Now, you've already had the lolling tongue come out of his mouth when he first confronts Granny. And it's this huge long tongue comes out. And of course, this is the film where the wolves come out of the people. The wolf is inside. So Stephen Ray tears his flesh and the wolf comes out. Very, very shoddy animatronic, I will say that. And then you get this, and the wolf, the poster shot, he leans back, the tongue comes out, and then a snout thrusts its way out of his mouth, like that. And then the wolf splits his skin, and it's just a wolf there. But it's an injured wolf. Now, I think this is the wolf in this shot as well, not a dog. This is the wolf. And Rosalind realises, and she comes down and she kneels beside it and she cradles this wolf, and it puts its paw on it across her arm like that, and it does sort of nuzzle into it, and she's like, I'm sorry. I'll tell you the tale of a wounded wolf. And I'll get on to this music now, which is the Wolf Girl on the soundtrack. And she tells this tale, and it's this is not Angela Carter that wrote this. This was something they added to try to give a bit more poetic lyricism and revelation and meaning to what she's gone through. Rosalind character's gone through. And we go back to the village at night time. We've seen this fantastic set designed well, and a wolf comes up from the well, and it comes up from the well below to the well above, and it starts to sniff around and investigate the village, going across the little stone humpback bridge. She didn't mean anyone any harm, but someone meant harm towards her, and a rifle comes out of a window, injures the wolf, and the wolf takes off, and she ran again, and she ends up in the churchyard, the tombstones of the local church. And we've seen, the vicar there cutting the dead wood off the trees, delivering a sermon, burying Rosalind's sister. And he comes up, who's there? And the wolf is transformed into a nude girl, played by Daniela Dax, who was part of the new romantic music scene during the 80s, given huge hair and massively bushy Scorsese eyebrows again. Sorry folks, I get very emotional about this sequence, and yet I don't even know why. As a kid, it upset me, it moved me. Watching it now does the same thing. Playing the music was probably a mistake. Fenton's gorgeous, luxurious, romantic, tragic music, just... What kind of creature are you? Are you from heaven or hell? Or what do I care? You're injured. So he takes her in, looks after her. Her tears have dripped down her face. Little tubing under her eyes have leaked massive amounts of the tears, and they've fallen onto a white rose and turned it red. Is that symbolism of menstruation? I don't know. I don't know. I think it possibly is. He takes her in, he treats her, and then she goes back. It's a tale of whimsy, this little tale. Goes back across the bridge, this nude girl with the big hair, and then she goes back to the well and climbs back down to the world below. What does that mean? What does that mean? I think it means Rosalind has had sex with the huntsman. All metaphor, all symbolism. She's had sex with him. She's sampled the world that she's moving into, the world above. And it's dangerous. It hurts. A white rose turning red, you can bleed. I think that's what it's saying. And I find it curiously upsetting and lovely at the same time. So we then, of course, she's gone, the wolf girl is gone. It's such a sweet and very short little vignette, really. Of course, the family and all the villagers have arrived at Granny's cottage with their guns blazing, and the wolf, the huntsman wolf, has broken through the window and took off, and they're all like, but they don't hit it. They burst in. There's another wolf sitting there. David Warner comes in and he's like, ah. But the mother shoots through the ceiling because she's seen the crucifix that she'd given to Rosalind around the wolf's neck. She knows it's her daughter, and the wolf, Rosalind, leaps out the window and runs after the huntsman wolf, and the two take off into the forest. The little village scrote, he knows, and he shouts, Rosalind! So, Rosalind has done the deed. Rosalind, the modern day version, has dreamt about this moment happening, about what it all means, the pain, the suffering, the blood, the awe, the fear, the wonder, the beauty of it all. And she's done the transition, she's done the deed. What follows then is we cut back to her in the bed, writhing during all this dream, the dream fit, dream fugue. And we, in a bookending sequence to all the wolves that pursued her sister in her first dream, all the wolves tumble into the house, which has now been transformed into a decayed, cobwebbed, almost Hammer Bray Studios version of its former self. The wolves tumble up the stairs, they plunge in slow motion through paintings and on the walls, they plunge through the windows, they're coming for her. Neil Jordan says that when he watches it back, why does she scream? She's not meant to be afraid, she's one of them. Why does she scream? Sarah Patterson as Rosalind, as the wolves come through into her bedroom, screams and screams, and then the film ends with that little poem you heard before, a couple of times, and you're bound to hear it again as well. She screams, and he says, like, that was a mistake. If I was doing it now, I wouldn't have her doing that, because she's one of them. Why is she screaming in fear? She's not shown any fear throughout the entire story, so why would she do it now? I'll tell you why I think it is. Oh, I'm going to scream now because my tea's gone cold. Damn it. Because she's done the deed. And she's screaming because she's feeling guilt. After you've done it, let's be honest, folks, your first time's never as satisfying as you think it's going to be. There's a feeling of revulsion, a feeling of guilt, a feeling of shame. It passes very quickly. But nevertheless, you do feel that sort of shame of what you've allowed yourself to do, what you've done, what you wanted, what you enjoyed, this forbidden fruit. Shame that your parents are never going to look at you the same way again. All of these conflicting, bizarre emotions come bubbling into her head. She's now, after the dreams, she's one of them, and she's kind of wanting her childhood back, the innocence back. She wants all that back. That's how I view it. So this is it. This is the wolves coming through. The realization, I'm now one of you. Is it what I really wanted? Is it what it's cracked up to be? It's the whole thing. It's just an explosion of emotion. It's fantastic. I think you're going to get that message again now. But we'll listen to it again. We may as well. It stands the test of time, you know.
Little girls, this seems to say, never stop upon Never trust a stranger friend. No one knows how it will end.
Indeed.
As you're pretty, so be wise. Wolves may lurk in every guise. Now, as then, 'tis simple truth. Sweetest tongue has sharpest tooth.
Perfect, isn't it? It's perfect. Angela Carter did not write that. That's not her. She did write poems, but that's not one of hers. And sadly, I have forgotten the name of the person that did write that. Damn it. Set design for this movie was by Anton First. Anton First, his charcoal drawings drew the attention of a lot of filmmakers, and his gothic sensibilities transformed this fantastic little set with these trees and the well and the little mine shaft, the cottages, the hovels. He made it in this purely dreamlike, beautiful, rural, fantastical landscape. Brilliant. Anton First went on to cut. It was quite kind of clear with his sort of design aesthetic that someone like Tim Burton was going to scoop him up. So Tim Burton used him. And Batman. He never did do Batman Returns though. And sadly, Anton First did commit suicide as well. With a very, like a lot of artistic geniuses, a very dark side, a very tortured side to him as well. Drink, drugs, I think, as well. And he launched himself off a 7-story car park. But his design work for this movie is fantastic. The miniature work is often very obvious. There's some painting shots where Rosalind's climbed that big tree and finds the stalk and the little carved babies. There's a distant shot and it's like a little Barbie doll sitting on the branch in the red shawl, and the stalk's flying off into the distance, but it's a painted shot. It's very obvious. But some of the miniatures at night time, little miniature hovels and cottages, and Granny's house especially, there's little stone walls and all of that, and the chimney smoke coming out of it, and light emanating from the little windows. Looks fabulous. Looks fabulous. It's the greatest play set you could ever have. It's wonderful. And George Fenton's music. Rhapsodic, often languorous, always bewitching, always beautiful, powerful and exciting by turn. He said that a friend of his played him a recording of old Swedish folk music, violins and fiddles, and so he incorporated a lot of that into it. He had some great solo artists in there, again on the strings, but he also, unusually, he had a synclavier, a synthesizer. So you do have a fair bit of electronica going on in here and synthesized sounds, but it works fabulously well and creates its own mythic sort of musical landscape. The music is phenomenal. I play it a lot. I've got the original, where is it now? The original vinyl. Oh, it's over there. The Wolfman's guarding it. Can you see that over there? The original vinyl. The film is out on Blue, and it looks good, looks great. The only extra, sadly, is a fabulous Neil Jordan commentary track, which is very illuminating. So I recommend that. And I recommend the film. It's powerful, it's potent, it's poetic, it's sensual, the performances are dazzling. Sarah Patterson is unbelievably good, very assured. At times looks very young, at other times looks alarmingly demure and attractive, and that's the point, you know. It's the burgeoning sexuality and how to use it and twist it. And the effects, Chris Tucker's effects and his team, some of the animatronics are great, some of the effects, the makeup effects are good. Stephen Ray tearing his face to bits is fabulous, but the wolves themselves, the animatronics, do let the film down in the technical sort of viewpoint, but from a stylistic point of view, a child having dreams and the sort of heightened unreality of these creatures during their mid-transformation moments, maybe it works. I take myself above any criticism of it, but I do notice at the time, I go, oh, I wish that was better. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Most of this film, 99.999% of this movie, works to perfection. The visuals, the imagery, the music, the performances, startling, engrossing, and they never leave you. I've watched this film countless times, and I'll watch it countless times more, and I'll never tire of it. So folks, that was Kilt-Man's hopefully entertaining and interesting and rather impassioned take on Neil Jordan's exquisite The Company of Wolves from 1984. I have been and always shall be Kilt-Man. Please be happy, be safe. Never eat a windfall apple. Never trust a man whose eyebrows meet in the middle. And keep it kilted, keep it Celtic. And folks, there's nothing like The Company of Wolves. Because you know what? We are all wolves. All of us. And I'm going to see you all